Today we're going to continue with our elements of art, and today we're going to look at an incredibly important element, color. Color can sort of bring out our emotions. Color can sort of change the way we feel. I mean, if you think about it, we hold a lot of put a lot of import on color. I mean, some of you might even have a favorite color. I doubt that most of you have a favorite element from from the rest of the list. I don't know if any of you have a favorite line out there or a favorite. You might have a favorite texture. I don't know. But anyway, let's go with color. So what is color? Well, color is light. Color and light are synonymous, right? And this can be proven if you take a prism which refracts light and you shine a white light through it, and then what happens? It breaks up into what we call the color spectrum, or the rainbow, right? When you see water passing through droplets after a rainstorm, we basically see the spectrum. So color is light. White light can be separated into these individual colors. So how does color work? Well, each color has a different wavelength, right? And objects either absorb or reflect those different wavelengths. So I'm wearing a blue shirt, and the reason you're seeing a blue shirt is because white light, which contains all of the colors, is hitting my shirt. And my shirt is absorbing all of those colors. It loves all of the colors except blue, and it reflects that blue back at you. Now your eye picks up just those blue wavelengths, and that is absorbed into your eye, into your retina. That is transmitted into an electrical impulse into your optic nerve and sent to your brain, and your brain goes, oh, look, blue. So what's happening inside your eye? Well, inside your retina, you have these little detectors called cones and rods. Cones detect colors, and rods detect value, blacks and whites and grays. So you have three basic cones. And the best way to remember this is color starts with C, cone starts with C, and then rods don't. So color, you have three little detector cells in there, red, blue, and green, and those can combine the wavelengths in different ways that you can see all the different colors. There's a little chemical reaction that happens when certain wavelengths hit those cones and rods. That's transmitted into an electrical impulse. Your brain responds to it, and you see, right? So, cones and rods. So, to understand color, in the 18th century, we developed this, and I didn't have anything to do with it, but physicists developed this system called a color wheel. And the color wheel, even though in some ways it can be argued that it's outdated, it's still very, very useful. Because the color wheel tells us some important things. It tells us how colors relate to each other, and it tells us how colors mix together. So if we look at our color wheel, we can see we have three primary colors. And the primary colors are red, yellow, and blue. And we call these primary colors because primary means first. And so all colors are derived from mixing these colors. It also means these colors technically, theoretically, are irreducible. There's an argument against that, but that's a little more advanced from what we're trying to get into here. But so, for all intents and purposes, these colors are irreducible. So you can't, red just exists, yellow just exists, blue just exists, but you can combine those colors and create what we call secondary colors. And the secondary colors are orange, green, and violet. And I just realized my orange looks more like a kind of a deeper yellow, so I do apologize. Anyway, it might look different on your screen. But anyway, so if we look at our color wheel here, we see the three primaries form basically a triangle, right? And then if we look at the halfway mark between two different colors, yellow and red, we find the color that they mixed. So if you mix yellow and red, you get orange. If you mix red and blue, you get violet or purple. Blue and yellow, we get green, right? And then if you mix a primary and a secondary, then we get a tertiary And this is a small color wheel. You could have color wheel with hundreds of colors on it, and you can have, you know, I guess quadraries and quintaries and sextaries and septaries. You can keep going and going and going. But this is a simple enough color wheel. And artists and designers use this as a way of understanding how colors mix together. When an artist mixes colors, mixes paints together or pigments, actual physical colors, red pigments, blue pigments, whatever it is, this is called subtractive color. Because when you mix paint, the colors will ultimately reduce. So if I took all of the colors of the rainbow as paint and mixed them together, they would reduce down to black. So that's why it's called subtractive colors, because the light is subtracted, right? They would absorb all light and it would appear black. That's why it's called subtractive mixing, and that is what happens when you mix actual physical pigments or paints. When we mix light together, though, we get something called additive mixing. And when you mix lights together, they add up, and instead of reducing down to black, they actually add up to white. Those colors of the rainbow reconstitute into white light. So if, as you can see by my animated GIF or GIF, I don't want to offend anybody, if you can see by my animation here in the center, we have three colors, and when they line up, we get white light. Okay, so if you mix all the colors together, basically you get, they reconstitute. And this is what happens when you look at a TV monitor, or a phone screen, or a tablet, whatever it is. You are actually looking at three colors. You're looking at red, green, and blue. And they're flashing on and off very, very quickly. And your eye basically blends those colors together, and those form all of the other colors. So you are really seeing an optical illusion, and we'll get more into this in a moment. But that's additive mixing, when you blend light. So you could take like three spotlights of different colors, red, green, and blue, and overlap them, and you would get white light. Here we have an example of additive and optical mixing with a technique called halftone printing, or sometimes called CMYK. CMYK stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and K means key color, but what it really means is black. It's a printing term, and it goes all the way back to the earliest color printing techniques. But basically how it works is that it prints a series of dots in these three colors in black, and then by combining the dots, overlaying and overlapping them on top of each other, you can create different colors. The reason cyan, magenta, and yellow are used is because of the way the inks combine on the page. It gets very technical, and there's a lot of sort of chemistry and physics involved in this, but that is why cyan, magenta, and yellow are used. But you can combine these three colors and black in different ways to get many different colors. You've probably experienced this with inkjet printing. If you've ever printed any sort of image at home or at school using an inkjet printer, you've seen this effect, because what inkjets do is they have three cartridges, right? They have four cartridges: cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, and they shoot little dots of that ink onto the page. And you've probably also experienced what happens when you run out of one of those colors. Like, for example, if you run out of cyan, then everything looks kind of orange, because that cyan isn't there to balance everything out. Or if you run out of magenta, everything looks kind of blue-green, right? Those colors combine, and your eye mixes those colors together. Okay, this is a CMY color wheel, so you can see we have yellow, magenta, and cyan instead. So there's not just one kind of color wheels. It kind of depends on if you're doing subtractive or additive mixing, CMYK. There's lots of ways to kind of think about and combine these colors. So here's an image of, for example, on your left, using this CMYK technique. it gets, like I said, it gets very complicated. But I basically want you guys to understand the difference between additive and subtractive color. I want you to know what optical mixing is. I want you to know what CMYK is. Those kinds of basic things. So we've been talking about optical mixing, where your eye does the mixing. And I want to talk about an artist who specializes in optical mixing. His name is Chuck Close, and he's a very actually, I'm covering up his name. It looks like, yeah, he's a very interesting and fascinating and very successful artist. But I want to take a look at a work on the right. This is a work called Frank he made in 1970. And throughout the 1960s and 1970s, Chuck Close was what we called a photorealist painter. He painted in such a realistic way that people often mistook his paintings for photographs. So what you're seeing over here is a painting. That is not a photograph. And he specialized in faces. And Chuck Close is fascinated by faces because he has a neurological condition called prosopagnosia. Prosopagnosia is otherwise known as face blindness. And there is a part of your brain that actually recognizes faces. And in human beings, this is a very well-developed part of your brain, because being social creatures and interacting with people and needing to recognize them, there's a part of our brain that really focuses on the human face. But some people, either due to genetics or brain trauma, that area can be damaged, and they have trouble recognizing faces. In most milder cases, it just means you're going to confuse people, and it's hard to tell, like one bearded bald guy from another, for instance. But in extreme cases, people can not even recognize the face as human. And there's a famous book called "The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat" by a neurologist named Oliver Sacks, who it's a fascinating book, but it's about this. It's about neurological disorders, and one of the chapters is about this guy who was so face blind that he couldn't even tell who his wife was. He had to listen to her voice, or look for her clothes, or smell her, and recognize her through other means besides looking at her face. And there's a very famous anecdote in there about him. She's standing in the room motionless, and he mistakes her for a coat rack. So he doesn't even see her as human, and he tries to put his hat on her. It's really quite odd. That's an extreme case. But Chuck Close suffers from a milder case, but he cannot recognize faces, and so this made him fascinated by faces, and this is why he painted faces in this hyper-realistic manner. And then in 1988, he suffered a spinal artery collapse. It's this really rare condition, and he had been lecturing somewhere, and he was crossing the street, and all of a sudden he lost the movement in his legs, and he collapses, and he never recovered. He was paralyzed from this. And as an artist, of course, this was, it would have been horrific to happen to anybody, and for an artist especially so, because he lost most of the movement he lost the movement in his legs and significant movement in his arms and hands. He can still move his arms, I think, to a degree, but he has almost no motion in his fingers. And so this means that he could not paint in the way that he used to paint. He couldn't paint with this sort of exacting detail that this photorealistic style required. First of all, he had a new studio built. Thankfully, he was insured, and he had this new studio built to accommodate his disabilities. And you can see this image down here. He basically has an easel on a remote control. It's hooked up to hydraulics, and he has a little remote, and he can raise and lower and move his paintings left and right. Pretty cool technology. But even though now he can access his canvases, he can't really he still can't really paint with the detail that he used to. So he had to change the style he painted with. And he now switched to this optical mixing style. And so what he does is he takes a photograph. He still mostly deals with faces. He takes a photograph or has an assistant take a photograph, and then they draw a grid line, on it. And then he takes that same grid and puts it on a large canvas. And then what he does is he paints small little squares. And each of those squares, as you can see, contains different colors. Now he understands how colors mix so well that he can put, and if you can see on your screen here, in some of these squares are colors that you would never think that any skin tone has, like, fluorescent, bright blues or fluorescent greens or yellows. I mean, these are colors we don't associate with skin tones, but because your eye is mixing them together with the adjacent colors, as you move back, all of a sudden we see a face. It's pretty cool stuff. He doesn't use a computer either to mix these colors together. He's just so in tune and understands how color works so well that he's able just to determine, he can look at a small spot on somebody's face or arm or whatever, small spot of flesh, and see neon greens and yellows and baby blues. It's rather incredible. It's incredible stuff. There are some YouTubes out there and some podcasts out there with interviews with him that I would suggest going to find, because he's a really fascinating guy. He's kind of salty in his language, so if you're offended by some F-bombs, you might want to avoid him. But as a balded, bearded man who wears glasses, I recommend Chuck Close. No, we're not the same guy. But if you're face blind, anyway. But in all actuality, optical mixing is nothing new. In fact, in the 1890s, the French artist Georges Seurat was experimenting with a version of optical mixing he called pointillism, and he derived this name because from the fact that he used small little dots of paint. If you look very closely here, you can see there's yellows and blues, little dots, and then if of course you stand away from them, your eye blends those colors together, creating shades of brown. He is using this idea of complementary colors, and the colors are sort of dulling each other out, and your eye is doing all of the mixing. Now I want to talk about the dynamics of color. When we look at our color wheel, of course, we can understand what happens when you mix two colors together. So if I mix yellow and blue, the color wheel tells me I get green. But it can also explore. We can also explore what we call color dynamics, color relationships, in other words, with these color wheels. So, for example, this shows me what happens when I put opposite colors together, or what are known as color complements. So, for example, the opposite of yellow is violet. That's its complement. The opposite of orange is blue, and red is green. Now, if I mix these colors together, they would basically cancel each other out. They would turn gray. Why? Because the wavelengths of these colors are very different. They're almost opposite of each other. So if I mixed red and green together, they would gray out. If I mixed yellow and violet, the same thing would happen. But if I place them next to each other, they actually intensify and complement each other. This is something that we're going to call simultaneous contrast. We'll look at this in a moment. But because their wavelengths are very different, this creates this sort of illusion of vibrating edges and the colors sort of popping out at you. Here's what I mean. On the right are what we call analogous colors. Analogous colors are next to each other on the color wheel, and we'll explore those more in just a moment. But look what analogous colors look like. For example, blue next to green. It looks, not too exciting. Or orange next to red. Yeah, not so much. But look over here. Look at red next to its complement. What's its complement? Green. Opposite on the color wheel. And we get this simultaneous contrast. And look what happens. That green literally looks like it's popping off that green background. It's the same way with the blue and the orange. That blue almost looks like it's just floating above that orange field. It's pretty cool, right? And it's because those wavelengths are vibrating next to each other. They're clashing with each other. And also if we look at near complements, so yellow and blue, for example, it's not as intense, but it's still pretty intense. The further away the colors are located from each other on the color wheel, the more they will intensify each other, and the more we'll get this simultaneous contrast. Simultaneous contrast means that the wavelengths clash and the colors vibrate and intensify each other. It's kind of neat, right? Now, this is something you will actually see a lot in advertising. You see it all the time, the use of complementary colors. And remember, complementaries are opposite as opposed to analogous, which are neighbors. Complementary colors intensify because of simultaneous contrast. So next time you will go into the grocery store, look at the product labels, and you will notice that the logos and the labels are often use as complement or near complementary colors. For example, red and green, or the Tide logo. Don't eat the anyway. Yellow and orange. Like probably like 3 people actually ate a Tide Pod, and then a whole generation went, everybody's eating Tide Pods. Okay. But so here's the thing. Yellow and orange, are complements or near complements of blue, right? And so look at the way they really intensify each other. So we see that a lot. You also can use this to your advantage if you want to make your eyes pop. Use a color that is more opposite than your eye color as your eyeshadow. So if you want your blue eyes to really pop, use something in the orange or yellow sort of range. If you want your green eyes to pop, you get it. This is used a lot in movie posters, to the point that it's actually a cliche and even a meme. Blue and orange are sort of the colors of the moment. Actually, probably not now, but really for the last 10 years, it's starting to go away because people are starting to meme about it even. That these movie posters all look the same. And this is one of my favorite clean memes, I have to say. I don't understand this trilogy at all. I find it funny, but I'm a simple man. But it's because of the colors are so similar. But it works, right? Your eye doesn't want to leave those movie posters because that blue and orange is really making those colors pop because of good old buddy simultaneous contrast. And here we can see simultaneous contrast working in a painting. The complementary colors blue and orange are being used here by the artist Frederick Edwin Church to make this sky pop. That's why sunsets are so beautiful sometimes, because the way the orange sunlight reflecting on the bottom of the clouds contrast with the blue sky, it looks pretty awesome. And so simultaneous contrast is happening. Those complementary colors are doing their job, and they are popping out at you. Thank you, science. It's very nice of you. Analogous colors, as I've said, are colors that are neighbors. They're related to each other. Think of it as an extended family. It's a family reunion. Yellow, green, and blue. Green just hanging out, being buddies on the color wheel. And the effect is very different. Instead of standing out and popping, the feeling is more of it's relaxing. It's more harmonious, isn't it? Because those wavelengths are more in sync. Okay. So colors can be tricky. I'm going to move my little box down here. Hey, I'm in the middle now. Colors can be tricky things, guys. Seeing is not always believing. In fact, hopefully by the end of this class, you'll realize seeing is not believing. That basically, seeing is kind of a lie. We are being deceived all the time by artists and designers and people who understand how to manipulate and work these elements and principles of design. So there was a color theorist and artist named Joseph Albers who in the 20th century really started to explore how colors could affect each other. And if you look at this image on the left, this very famous image by Joseph Albers, you'll see that there are two brown squares, and they appear to be different shades of brown. But they're actually not. If we look over here to the right, we realize, oh, it's the same brown. Why do they look different? Simultaneous contrast. Complementary colors. Orange is actually a shade of... brown is actually a shade of orange. It is just a kind of orange, really. And so when you put one kind of orange next to another kind of orange, well, those are analogous colors. So the orange looks sort of dull. But when you put that orangey brown next to a blue, and you let those wavelengths do their magic and vibrate against each other, boy, oh boy, you got some color excitement, guys. Settle down. I know. It's getting a little crazy out there. But yeah, it's pretty cool, right? Okay, what else? Key characteristics of color. So this will be different than what your book tells you. There's different ways to interpret this, but really most color theorists say there are 3 basic properties of color. Your book says there are 4, and I'll explain to the difference here in a moment. But let's talk about these 3. There's hue. The general classification of a color is seen in the visible spectrum. So a hue is just the color. Red, yellow, blue. Those are hues. Green is a hue. Orange is a hue, right? Value is a measure of lightness and darkness. We've already talked about this. And so light, think of black and white and all the grays in between. But we can also have value with color, as you will see. We can have tint and shades. So we can have tint is lighter value, shade is a darker value. These are both blues, but one blue has more white in it, one other blue has more black in it. All right? And then we have saturation, which is the purity of the color. And then we have tone. Now, your book actually says saturation and tone are 2 different things, but really tone is a kind of saturation. It just means the color is less saturated or pure. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. So we're going with there are 3 basic properties of color here. There is hue, value, saturation. All right? So let's talk about hue. Oh, not that Hugh. Sorry. Not Hugh Jackman. Hue is the general classification of color, red, yellow, blue, right? We associate hue with sort of the ideal hue. So like, for example, when I think of the ideal red, I think of like stop sign red. Yeah? So that's a hue. It's sort of the color in its purest state. And then this is an example of hue. That orange is, to me, like the quintessential orange. That is its hue. These are fascinating. I want to show you. I want to talk about these really briefly. These come from the country of Ghana in West Africa. Ghana is, and I actually had a student from Ghana who I asked about these. Like, this was only about 2 semesters ago. But there's this tradition of having these, when you die, of having your coffin shaped like a major aspect of your life. It could be your job, your career, your whatever it is. And so this is the coffin of a cocoa, a guy who owns a cocoa plantation. So it's shaped like a cocoa pod, which I think is kind of cool. And then this guy was a pilot, and this guy raised chickens. That guy, I wonder what he died of. But I find these fascinating. This guy, raced cars, whatever. But my student from Ghana said this is a thing, but not. It's not a huge thing. That it's a small part of the population, and people kind of make fun of those people. So it's always great to get insight from different cultures. That's what I love about teaching, is that I have students from all over the place, and a lot of misconceptions that I've had about different parts of the world have been dispelled by getting to know those people from cultures that aren't my own. It's pretty cool. And so I've been teaching these images for a while, thinking that, you know, maybe not everybody in Ghana was buried in these, but that it was a major thing. But it's actually a very small, it is a very small sort of cultural aspect of their culture. And only a few people kind of do this. And those people are kind of made fun of a bit. So let's talk about value. Value is light. And dark. We've already talked about this. And we looked at value on a gray scale. Black and white and all the shades in between. But we can make, color can have value. You can add white to a color to get tints, or you could add black to a color to get shades. Tints and shades. These are the lights and darks of color. All right, pretty easy, right? And you can use different tints and shades to create a work that is monochromatic. It is one hue, but it is different tints and shades of the same color. So for example, the image on the right is monochromatic, mono meaning one, monochromatic blue, but it's different tints and shades of blue. Or the famous painting by Pablo Picasso on the left, the old guitarist, we have various tints and shades of blue here. Although this is a sort of an orangey brown, which is a compliment, and he threw in there for some excitement. But ignore that. The rest of this painting is a monochromatic image. So then we have saturation. This is the purity of a color. So saturation, we tend to associate with its purest state, its highest level of chroma or saturation. Your book uses the term chroma, so I'm going to put it in here once. That is a term that almost nobody else uses. So we're going to forget that word exists except for this one page, and we're going to use the word saturation. It refers to the purity or dilution of a color. So a color that is really pure is saturated. So this image, this painting by Barnett Newman, is a very saturated red. This is stop sign red, isn't it? That's pure saturated red. And you've encountered saturation, the term, I'm sure, using Insta. If you've ever bumped up the saturation, the colors get really intense and become really pure colors. Those greens become super green. Those reds become super red because you are saturating them. Or you could desaturate them. And if you desaturate them, these are called tones. But really quickly, I want to look at a painting that is super saturated. This is a painting by an artist named André Derain. André Derain was a member of a group of artists called the Fauves. The Fauve in French means wild animal or wild beast. And these guys lived in the early 20th century, and they were modern artists, and they wanted to shake up the world. They wanted to sort of, you know, this painting is sort of like the OK Boomer of its day. They wanted the old people to look at this and go, oh my God, kids these days. And they wanted to express their emotions and feelings, and they wanted to do that with color. And they used super saturated, intense colors. And the colors were so outrageous at the time that an art critic saw their show and said, these guys paint like a bunch of wild animals. They paint like a bunch of fauves. And these young guys who wanted to sort of shock the older crowd went, yeah, fauves. That's pretty cool. We're going to go with that. Yeah, we're fauves. All right, moving on. So saturated colors are colors that are very, very pure. But we can make what is known as a tone or a desaturated color by either adding gray or by adding its color complement. So if we look down here at the bottom of our little chart here, we have the color yellow, and on the far left we have a super saturated pure yellow. But if I add gray, notice how it becomes less yellow. It becomes less saturated. The same thing would happen is if I added violet, the opposite of yellow. It would also desaturate and turn kind of grayish. Notice that's different than value. This doesn't become gray, it just becomes less bright, right? This doesn't become black, it just becomes sort of, or it doesn't become less yellow, it just becomes darker. So tints and shades or value are different than tones or desaturation, and which is part of saturation. I know it's difficult, and I don't want you guys, you're not going to get this probably right off the bat. That's okay. At this point, I just want you to know what these terms mean, right? I want you to know that tint and shades are part of value, and I want you to know that desaturation and tone, which are basically the same thing, are part of, are aspects of saturation. That's good enough for me right there. All right. So tone is our weaker saturation states. This is a painting that is comprised of various tones. Right. So a big part of color So a big part of color is perception, and we already saw this a little bit. We already touched on this topic when we talked about Joseph Albers, and remember the brown stripe and the, how it looks different because of complementary contrast. But we all perceive the world differently because our eyes work differently, our brain processes information differently. And the image on the left is a very controversial image. Some of you are seeing either a white and gold image dress, some of you are seeing a black and blue dress. And the reason it has to do with the way our brains perceive color. This is something I'm going to save for class, so we'll talk more about this very famous image and why it's so famous and why it's so frustrating to so many people in class. But I do want to look at the image on the right, because what you're looking at the image on the right is some of you are seeing a number. Some of you are seeing the number 74. Some of you are not. And that all depends on whether the fact you have something called color blindness. Color blindness has to deal with the number of cones that we have in our eye. Remember, we have these color receptors called cones. And some people have more cones than others. And especially with men. Genetically, there's a portion of men, something like 40%, don't quote me on that, but there is a percentage of men who have some level of color blindness. And it has to deal with the number of red and green cones. Some men have fewer red and green cones than others, and so this number might be very difficult or impossible for you to see because of your lack of cones. Most women are not colorblind. You can become colorblind with injuries to the eye, but genetic colorblindness is super rare in women because it is passed on the along the Y chromosome, which only men have. But what some women do have, and it's a very tiny percentage, it's like 1,000th of a percentage of women have an extra cone. Remember, some men, we have 3 cones, red, green, and blue, in our eye. But some women have a yellow cone, and they can pick up yellows that nobody else can see. It's super rare, and it's like 1 in 100 million or something. I don't even know the statistics. It hardly ever happens. But there are some women out there who who have a super color vision that other people do not have. So, you know, when people say seeing is believing, that is not true at all. We perceive the world in different ways. Some people see the dress on the left as black and blue. Some see it as white and gold. Some can see the number 74. Others can't. Seeing is not believing because of our various variations in our physiology and our neurology. So let's talk a little bit about color perception. The lemon that we all see is yellow, but you are not actually seeing yellow. You are watching this on a red, green, and blue monitor. You are watching this on a phone or a tablet, pardon me, or a computer. I've been recording a lot of videos today. And there, of course, is no yellow on your computer screen. There's only blue, green, and yellow, blue, red, and green pixels. So what is happening? How do you see yellow? Well, what is happening is Yellow actually falls on the spectrum somewhere around here. Remember, light is made up of wavelengths, and so red has a particular wavelength, green has a particular wavelength. Yellow kind of falls in the middle of red and green. So what happens is when you look at your screen and you look at this image of a lemon, you're actually seeing red and green pixels at a certain ratio. But your brain is confused. Your brain is like, well, I'm seeing X amount of red pixels and X amount of green pixels that fall somewhere on this part of the spectrum, and that's what yellow things look like, so I must be seeing something yellow, even though you're not. Okay? Another color that, sort of deception that we often see is the color magenta. Magenta doesn't actually exist. Remember, color is made up of light, and it is made up of a spectrum of wavelengths that exist in that white light. And there is no magenta on the spectrum, and yet we see it. And the reason is because you're seeing a combination of red and violet, and your brain doesn't know how to process this. It doesn't know what to do with it. So it just turns it into magenta, although there is actually not a magenta there, right? Magenta doesn't exist. Your brain just doesn't know what to do with it. So we see a color that's not real. Seeing is not believing. Another important aspect of color is the sensation. Colors are associated with emotional states. Think about the way we use color to describe how we feel. Like, you're feeling blue, right? You're green with envy. We associate colors with emotional states. Red represents anger. Think of, the red emoji. Or green can represent sickness. So, these come from associations with real life phenomenon, right? We associate warmth with fire because fire is orange and yellow, so when we see orange and yellow, we think warm. But this can affect the way we see the world. So let's take a look at the sensation of color. Some artists believe that color could express things beyond what we see. This is a painting by a guy named Vasily Kandinsky, and Kandinsky painted almost completely abstract works later on in his career because Kandinsky was a very spiritual guy, and he believed that color could represent spiritual ideas. He felt, the best way to represent abstract concepts was using abstract colors. So how do you express joy or love or God or faith? And he wrote this entire book called Concerning the Spiritual on Art. And in it, he wrote what all these different colors meant. Because he felt like if you wanted to portray sort of the spiritual world, the abstract world, you would have to do it through something like color. But of course, an artist who is very famous with his use of color was Vincent van Gogh. Vincent van Gogh used color to express emotion. Vincent van Gogh, as many of you know, and you guys are going to watch a video about him later on this semester, so I'm going to save a lot of his biographical details for then. But Vincent van Gogh was a man who suffered from emotional and psychological problems, and he associated color with emotion and with spirituality. This is his very famous painting, Starry Nights. And for him, when he looked up at the sky, he felt that he was not looking at just stars in the sky, but he was looking at souls up in heaven. And he wanted to paint an image that sort of represented this kind of spiritual sort of feeling of nature. And first of all, notice how he's using complementary or near complementary colors. Blues and sort of purplish blues contrasted with yellows and oranges to create this feeling of this use of simultaneous contrast, this almost vibration. Because for him, looking up at this night sky was almost like a spiritual experience. And so he's conveying that through color. Then also look how he's making the color ripple, almost as if you're looking at color reflecting on puddles in the water as you throw in a stone or as rain drips into the water. He's creating a almost otherworldly effect. And then the colors appear as if they're moving. He's creating these sort of swirls in the sky as almost if these are like souls flying up into heaven. So he's using color to express this sort of emotional ecstasy and this kind of spiritual ecstasy that he is experiencing. Another very famous image by Vincent van Gogh, where he expresses his emotion through color, is this famous painting called The Night Cafe. And Vincent van Gogh is a man who not only suffered from a sort of emotional instability, but also had some severe problems with alcohol too, that he probably used as a way to self-medicate. But in this image, we see him using color to express his emotions. Vincent van Gogh wrote prolifically about what his paintings meant, and in this image called The Night Cafe, he talks about how the red is meant to represent almost kind of a hellish state, and the green is meant to represent sickliness. As we look in this cafe and see these sort of drunkards sitting around, and this was something that he very much understood and had his own struggles with, and he's using color here to sort of represent sort of these kinds of negative, almost evil kinds of aspects of what he saw in this bar. We also see artists use color to express joy. This is the image on the right is a work by Henri Matisse. This image to express sort of the joy and the beauty of nature. On the image on the left, we have the artist Paul Gauguin, who used color in an expressive way to reflect, once again, spirituality. Here we have an image of these women who are having a spiritual vision, this image of this crucifixion, and Christ appears as this sort of yellow here, in this image literally called Yellow Christ. And he's using the yellow here kind of for a dual purpose. It's meant to express sort of the idea of joy and salvation. Christ literally is sort of the sun rising, but also yellow is a color that can represent sickliness. It can represent disease, and this is meant to sort of represent the horrors of the crucifixion. So he's using color here, though, to express both the emotional and kind of the spiritual state. So color can do a lot. And what I love about color is that it can kind of change our perceptions about things. I mean, here's a stack of trash, but because this is an artist who will often do these funny kinds of installations, the artist will go out and for example, create magenta polka dot trash bags to get reactions out of people, and to, but at the same time, sort of to create a happier environment. I mean, what's funny about this is, yes, this is trash. Yes, it has the same contents as a black or white trash bag, and yet it doesn't feel as bad, does it? It doesn't look as bad. It doesn't seem as grotesque because, well, it's magenta and polka dots, and it's fun. Color can change our perception. Color is also cultural. Color can change from culture to culture, and the meaning of color can change from culture to culture. This is an image of a wedding dress in two cultures, Western European and American cultures on the left, and East Asian cultures, Chinese to be specific, on the right. And these are both wedding dresses, but in American and Western cultures, white represents a wedding. We often use it to represent purity, but in East Asian cultures, it has a different meaning, and so red is the color of weddings. Another common color is funerals. Black we often use in this culture for the symbol of mourning, sadness, funerals, but in some cultures, white is a color that is related with mourning. So these things can be cultural. So it's important to understand the different cultural meanings from one culture to another, because it can really change the way you look at a work of art if you don't know what the colors represent. Talk really quickly now about time and motion. This is, of course, time and motion are synonymous. You can't have one without the other. You can't move through space without going through time, right? So how do you portray the passage of time in work of art that is static, that doesn't move? For example, the image on the left, this ancient hunting scene. How do you portray movement? Well, by sort of giving the impression of movement, by making the legs of these animals appear as if the animal is running. I'm going to move my little thing down here. Or you can show the passage of time, like the image on the right. This is a medieval image about the meeting of St. Anthony and St. Paul. And if you look at this image, you can see we have actually 3 St. Anthony's as he walks down his road here. But we know that we're not looking at triplets, but the artist has chosen to show the passage of time by showing us 3 different St. Anthony's in the same landscape, but we understand that we're looking at 3 different moments in time. But there are some works of art that actually use space and time itself as part of the artwork. And I think one of the artists who does this best is an artist named Nancy Holt. Nancy Holt is belongs to a group of artists we call land artists, or sometimes earthwork artists, because they do large-scale outdoor artworks built on large pieces of land or earth. And Nancy Holt especially uses the passage of time a lot in her work. This is a fascinating work. This comes from the University of South Florida, and this work called Solar Rotary. And on the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, exactly at noon, you see what happens. The sun will cast a shadow, so this spiral lays perfectly over this dais. But also, if you look around, you'll notice that there's these little markers. And on certain days of the year, that circle will align directly over that marker and highlight it. And these 5 different markers all highlight different moments in Florida history. So, not only is she sort of conveying the idea of history, of time past, but this work requires on the movement of the earth through space and time, so that at certain times of the year, the sun will hit on those markers right at the right moment. She also created a large work out in the desert in Utah called Sun Tunnels, which relies on space and time. These large concrete cylinders line up with the summer solstice once again. You can see at sunrise and sunset they line up. But also there's holes on the side, and these line up with different lunar cycles of the moon, and also at certain times of the year, different constellations. The stars will appear exactly lined up with those holes in the side. So I think that's fascinating stuff. So there are 5 attributes of time. There's duration, which is the length, how long something lasts. Tempo, which is the speed, how fast it occurs. The intensity, the energy level. The scope, that is the range of action. The setting, where it happens. And the chronology, the order of the sequence. So you're looking at an animated GIF, one of the first movies ever made. It is called The Sneeze, and this was made by the Thomas Edison Company. This is one of the first films ever shot, and Thomas Edison's engineers shot this as a way of experimenting with this new medium. And as silly as this is one of the first motion pictures, it contains all of the things we need. Duration, it's 5 seconds long, that's how long it lasts. Tempo, it is 16 frames a second. So movies are made up of frames of film, individual shots of film that you can see here. And so there's 16 frames that were shown that you see every second, giving the illusion of movement. Intensity, it's pretty high. The guy is moving through, he's sneezing pretty quickly here. The scope, the range of action is fairly limited. He's confined to one spot. He doesn't really move from one area to another. The setting where it's happening, it's in the Thomas Edison studio, and the chronology, it's in chronological order. It's in, goes from beginning to middle and end. Some movies don't, right? Like if you've ever seen a Quentin Tarantino movie, the beginning of the movie might be the middle of the story, right? So, things like flashbacks and stuff in a movie are out of order. So they're not necessarily in a chronological order. But that's real motion, right? But with implied motion, we have to, imply it. Like in this sculpture by Bernini here, where we see the god Apollo attacking this nymph, this woman Daphne. And as he attacks her, she runs away. She also turns into a tree. The Greek gods thought it would be a great idea to save Daphne's purity from Apollo by, instead of just, getting her the hell out of there, they thought turning her to a tree would be a better idea. But we get this feeling that she is literally sort of not only running away from him, but transforming, as we can see these sort of leaves springing from her fingertips as she flees from him. Now, of course, nothing is actually moving. It's all implied. But because of the position of the arms and legs, because of the twisting of the torsos and the bodies, because of these leaves sort of emerging from her fingertips, we get this implied motion. Now, implied motion actually exists when we look at a film or a video. These are works, I'm going to move my little video down here. These are works by an artist named Jenny Holzer. Jenny Holzer creates works of art using LED lights. She's been doing this since the late 1970s, early 1980s. She's one of the great pioneers, really, of modern art, of contemporary art. She was using sort of digital displays and stuff before it was even a thing. She's very cool. But, when you see these moving letters and words and numbers that she displays, you're not actually seeing movement. That is not the letter E moving through time. What's actually happening are little lights are just flashing on and off, but there is no actual movement. You're being deceived. So once again, this is sort of implied motion, right? There is actually nothing moving here. Another way of implying motion is through sort of creating this feeling of overlap. This is something you see a lot in cartoons, but this is a painting by a guy named Giacomo Balla, an Italian artist who was one of the first guys to experiment with this idea of creating sort of overlapping moments to give this feeling of movement through time, almost like a blurry photograph. When I look at this little dachshund running, boy, it looks like his little legs are really working really fast and hard, aren't they? But of course there is no motion. Another way of creating motion is to use mechanical devices. This is a device called a phenakistoscope. Phenakistoscope is sort of a child's toy that was invented in the early 1800s that kind of prefigured motion pictures. But these were devices where the drawing placed on one side, and then the viewer holds this image side up to a mirror. And as you look through the back of the slots and see the reflection in the mirror, you're given the illusion of movement. But of course, there is no movement. What you're actually seeing is a series of still images that are just moving very, very, very quickly. Another way of creating motion is by sort of messing with the limitations of the eye. And this is called an optical illusion. So our eyes, as you guys know by now, have some severe limitations. We can't see certain colors, or there are certain colors that we make up when we when our eyes don't know what to do with certain wavelengths. But what you're looking at the image on the right by the artist Bridget Riley is something called op art or optical art. Bridget Riley was a pioneer in this, and she created these optical illusions that are basically just deal with the limitations of our eye. Like, for example, the image on the right, it appears those waves are moving, but what is going on is that there are red and blue lines placed really close together. And as you know, there's red and blue cones in your retina. And these lines are so close together, your retinas don't know what to do with the information. They keep sort of going back and forth, focusing on the red and the blue. This creates an illusion of movement. And something very similar is happening with the black and white squares as they get closer. Here, your eye is having trouble differentiating between the two. It is losing focus, and so it is moving back and forth, giving this feeling of movement and motion. But then there are some works of art that actually move, right? What we call kinetic art that moves. This is a work by an artist named Alexander Calder, who created large works called mobiles. And these mobiles his were generally powered by wind, but some of them could be powered by engines or motors. But they actually move, right? And of course, then also in performance art, where people perform an action, you are actually seeing real-life motion too. So motion can be implied or it can be actual. And that's it. That wraps up today's lecture. Let me bring myself back on board here. So I'll see you guys in the next lecture. All right, take care.